Hello again, everybody. It is John Casey from Too Logical with another MQ moment where we delve into a noteworthy person's past to learn a little bit about their journey and their leveraging of their MQ, their motivational intelligence. Uh, Today's session comes from our Latin American files, and it's about Isabel Allende. Here's the quote that really triggered my interest in her backstory. The quote is, "My life seems to be about pain, loss, love, and memory. Pain and loss are the teachers. They make me grow. Love helps me endure and gives me joy. Memory is the raw material for all my writing." When I was a young man, I was an early employee at a telecom startup in Rochester, New York that would go on to become a very successful company. It was eventually bought by AT&T, and many millionaires were made. I was not one of them. I was in the right place at the right time, but I was the wrong person. I didn't recognize what was in front of me. And after realizing this, the first thing I did was not beat myself up for missing this opportunity. And second, I vowed to never let it happen again. I actually developed a saying, an affirmation that reminds me of this. And I say it every morning. Today, I win or learn. Repeating this each morning is a daily routine for me, like a cup of coffee. Both get me going. I want to remind myself that I learn more from my mistakes than I do my successes. They are my guides. They are okay to make as long as we don't repeat them. Sadly, most people have a more of a win or lose approach to their life, and they try to avoid mistakes. This shrinks their possibility and maybe even them. And when they do make a mistake, they beat themselves up and they think others are judging them. This is flawed thinking and it limits their potential. It also causes people to collect friends who think the same way. And usually this philosophy is passed on to their children. When we look closely at the lives of noteworthy people, why do we usually find a lot of difficulty and challenge? Clearly, they eventually rose above it. But what did that difficulty and challenge provide? It was a way to rediscover their motivational intelligence. Without challenge, how else do we get to practice and refine accountability, adaptability, resilience, initiative, and courage? We are born with this wonderful gift in programming. We see it universally demonstrated in 1 to 3-year-old children. Then many get that wonderful code overwritten with the wrong programming. And included in that bad code is the improper way to look at mistakes and difficulty. Isabel Allende, the Chilean writer, says this magically in her quote above. Pain and loss were her teachers, and she clearly had them. Before we hear about some of those teachers, let me share some of her accomplishments. She has been called the world's most widely read Spanish language author. She has received many honorary doctorates and international awards, including the U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom and the Dorothy and Lillian Gish Prize granted to international writers who have contributed to the beauty of the world. Now, to her teachers. Her father worked for the Chilean government at their embassy in neighboring Peru, where Isabel was born. Below are her words describing her early life. I grew up in a patriarchal family where my grandfather was second only to God Almighty. My mother, against his will, married the wrong man. My parents' marriage was a disaster from the start. One day, around my 3rd birthday, my father went to buy cigarettes and never returned. That was the first great loss of my life. And maybe that is why I can never write about fathers. There are so many abandoned children in my books that I could start an orphanage. My father left my mother stranded in a foreign country with three small kids. To make things worse, at the time, there was no divorce in Chile. Somehow, my mother managed to annul her marriage, and thus she became a single mother with three illegitimate children. She had no money, little education, no particular skills. Her only choice was to go back to her grandfather for help, which she did. This was key for Isabel because she now had support and guidance from her grandparents as well as her mother. Below is how she described her grandparents and their values. The home of my grandparents, where I spent my childhood, was inhabited by wild pets, strange humans, and benevolent ghosts. My grandmother was a charming lady who had little interest in the material world. My grandfather was as stubborn and strong as a mule and gave me the gift of discipline. He could remember hundreds of folk tales and long epic poems. He spoke in proverbs. He gave me the love of language and stories. In my family, happiness was irrelevant. My grandparents would have been astounded to learn that people actually spent money on therapy to get over their unhappiness. For them, life was naturally painful and the rest was nonsense. Satisfaction came from doing the right thing, from family, honor, service, learning, and enduring. Children were not praised or pampered. It was believed to be unhealthy. Physical appearance and the functions of the body were ignored. It was a crime of bad taste to talk about religion, politics, health, and above all, money. My family practiced charity abundantly and discreetly. Generosity was not a virtue, it was a duty, and nothing to brag about. She goes on to share more. The first part of my life ended on September 11th, 1973. That day, there was a brutal military coup in Chile. President Salvador Allende, which was her birth father's first cousin, the first socialist president ever elected democratically, died. In a few hours, a century of democracy ended in my country and was replaced with a regime of terror. Thousands were arrested, tortured, or killed. Many disappeared and their bodies were never found. The Allende family fled, and those who were abroad could not return. How did she become a writer? Well, she tells us that my fate changed on January 8th, 1981. That day, we received a phone call in Caracas, Venezuela, that my grandfather was dying. Could not go back to Chile to bid him farewell. So that evening, I started a sort of spiritual letter for that beloved old man. I assumed that he would not live to read it, but that didn't stop me. I continued writing like a maniac until dawn, when exhaustion defeated me and I crawled into my bed. "What were you doing?" my husband mumbled. "Magic," I answered. And indeed, magic it was. The following evening after dinner, again, I locked myself in the kitchen to write. I wrote every night, oblivious to the fact that my grandfather had died. The text grew like a gigantic organism with many tentacles. And by the end of the year, I had 500 pages on the kitchen counter. It didn't look like a letter anymore. My first novel, The House of Spirits, had been born. I had found the only thing that I really wanted to do: write stories. She was 39 years old when she began writing novels. She has since published over 20, including many short stories, TED Talks, and lectures. You know, we all have stories in us. Each of our families are filled with rich examples of leaps of faith, survival, good luck, and bad. You know, where we had to demonstrate RMQ. Find your family's stories and rediscover your own. Share them, write them. Thank you.